The morning sun hadn't yet crested the horizon when I heard the first angry words pierce through the crisp autumn air. My shoulders tensed as I recognized my brother-in-law Michael's voice, harsh and cutting like the morning frost.
"Only 5 crates today?"
He sneered, his expensive leather shoes crushing the dried leaves beneath his feet as he stalked across the farmyard.
"This is pathetic."
I straightened my aching back, wiping the sweat from my brow with a weathered hand. The growing season had been brutal. Drought followed by unseasonable rains and devastated most of our crop. These 5 crates represented hours of careful searching through our fields for the few healthy plants that had survived. Before I could respond, Lisa's manicured fingers dug into my shoulders as she spun me around to face her. Her designer sweater seemed garishly out of place against the earthy browns and greens of the farm.
"Get back out there,"
she demanded, her face twisted with rage.
"I already put a down payment on that Cartier bracelet I wanted. What are you going to do about it, you worthless thing?"
Her sharp nails pressed deeper, and something inside me, something that had been bending and bending for years, finally snapped. But instead of lashing out, I felt an eerie calm wash over me. My lips curved into the widest smile I've ever worn. "You're right," I said softly, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "Clearly, I haven't been working hard enough. I'm so sorry." I bowed deeply, my eyes fixed on the ground. Under my breath, I whispered, "Just you wait." Rather than returning to the field as they expected, I turned and walked away, my boots leaving firm impressions in the soft earth. Each step felt like a declaration of independence. My name is Sarah Thompson, and at 52 years old, I was about to change my life forever. Our family farm sits about 2 hours from downtown, nestled in a valley where the Thompson family has grown soybeans for generations. The old farmhouse where my in-laws still live stands sentinel over acres of fields, its white paint weathered but proud. A few years ago, they cleared a section of land nearby to build a home for Robert and me, though my husband still makes the long commute to his city job every day. Michael, my brother-in-law and the eldest son, had abandoned the farm years ago, chasing bright lights and bigger dreams. The last time I'd seen him was at our wedding, where he'd made it clear he considered farming beneath him. Robert and Michael's relationship had always been strained, like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap at the slightest touch. I remember the day my in-laws first talked about ending the farming business. We were sitting around their worn kitchen table, steam rising from the cups of coffee as George, my father-in-law, spoke the words that had been hanging in the air for months.
"Maybe it's time,"
he said, his calloused hands wrapping around his mug.
"Time to let it all go."
Martha, my mother-in-law, reached over and placed her hand on his arm, her eyes glistening. The sadness in their expressions cut deeper than any harvest tool ever could. Robert's response was immediate and fierce.
"If Michael won't take over, I will,"
he declared, standing up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor.
"We can't let the farm die."
But George and Martha exchanged a knowing look before shaking their heads.
"Farming isn't what it used to be, son,"
George said, his voice heavy with years of experience.
"The work would crush you. You've built a good life in the city."
"And we don't want Sarah to have to struggle," Martha added, giving me a gentle smile. "We've seen how hard this life can be on a marriage." The concern in their voices touched me deeply. These people who had welcomed me into their family were trying to protect us from the harsh realities they'd faced their whole lives.
"You're both still young,"
George continued, his stern face softening.
"It's better to work at a proper company than get stuck in farming. Don't worry about us. We've made our peace with it."
But watching my aging in-laws struggle with the physical demands of farming weighed heavily on my conscience. After several long discussions, Robert and I decided to help on his days off. It seemed like a simple solution at the time. We had no idea how that decision would change everything. My first day of actual farming was a harsh awakening. The pre-dawn air bit at my skin as I followed Martha through the dewy fields, my borrowed work boots already heavy with mud. She moved with a practiced grace while I stumbled along behind her, trying to match her efficient pace. "The morning hours are precious," she explained, demonstrating how to check the soybean plants for readiness. The cool air makes the work easier, and the produce stays fresher longer when harvested before the heat sets in. I watched in amazement as her weathered hands moved with precision, testing each pod with a gentleness that bellied their strength. When I tried to mirror her movements, my fingers felt clumsy and uncertain.
Like this,
she said patiently, guiding my hands.
feel how the pod gives just slightly when it's ready.
Too firm means it needs more time. Too soft means we waited too long. Robert joined us on weekends, his city-soft hands struggling with the physical demands even more than mine. One morning, after just an hour of carrying crates, he had to lean against the barn wall, his breath coming in heavy gasps. "Mother," he panted, watching Martha effortlessly hoist another crate onto the truck. "You're incredible." She just laughed, her eyes twinkling.
Years of practice, dear. Years of practice.
George would often watch us from the porch, calling out encouragement and gentle teasing in equal measure. "What's this? Getting tired already? The day's barely started." But beneath his jovial exterior, I could see the pride in his eyes when he watched his son trying to connect with his roots. Even though Robert struggled, he never gave up, and that seemed to mean everything to his father. Every visit ended the same way, Martha insisting we take home bags full of fresh vegetables. "You can't leave empty-handed," she'd say, pressing tomatoes, cucumbers, and whatever else was in season into our arms. "These are the fruits of your labor, too." The generosity was overwhelming, especially given how little we actually accomplished during our weekend visits. I found myself lying awake at night, thinking about their aging bodies carrying the full weight of the farm's demands day after day. When my part-time job at the local library ended, budget cuts forcing them to reduce staff, I saw an opportunity. That evening, I broached the subject with Robert over dinner. "I've been thinking," I said, pushing my food around my plate nervously. "With my job ending, maybe I could help your parents more during the week." Robert set down his fork and studied my face. "The farm work is brutal, Sarah. You know that better than anyone now. Are you sure that's what you want?" I nodded, my resolve strengthening as I spoke. It feels wrong to accept so much from them when we only help occasionally. Besides, I hesitated, then continued, I think I'm starting to love it. There's something special about watching things grow, about being part of creating food that sustains people. Robert reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "If this is what you want, I support you completely. Just promise me you'll be careful. Don't push yourself too hard." "I promise," I said, squeezing back. "Besides, your mother's already teaching me all her tricks for working smarter, not harder." The next morning marked the beginning of my new life as a farmer. Martha's face lit up when I arrived before sunrise, dressed in proper work clothes this time. "Well, look who's ready to become a farmer," she exclaimed, pulling me into a warm hug that smelled of earth and morning coffee. George took me under his wing, teaching me the Thompson family's secret to exceptional soybeans, their commitment to organic farming. "Anyone can dump chemicals on a field and force plants to grow," he explained as we walked the rows together. "But that's not farming, that's manufacturing. Real farming is about understanding the soil, the weather, the tiny creatures that make everything work together." He showed me how they struggled for years after inheriting the farm, fighting against conventional wisdom that said organic couldn't succeed. "People called us crazy," he chuckled, kneeling to scoop up a handful of rich, dark soil. "Said we'd lose everything. But look at this earth now, it's alive. That's what makes our soybeans special." Martha focused on teaching me the physical skills I'd need. "Farming will either break your body or make it stronger," she said, demonstrating proper tool handling. "The difference is in how you move." She taught me to use a hoe with the grace of a dancer, showing me how to let the tool's weight do most of the work. "That's right," she'd encourage as I found the rhythm. "Don't fight against it. Work with it." Hours would pass as we moved through the fields together, the repetitive motions becoming almost meditative. Even when sweat stung my eyes and my muscles screamed for rest, I found myself wanting to continue, to prove I could be worthy of their teachings. The rewards came in unexpected moments. The first time I correctly identified a plant ready for harvest without guidance. The morning I managed to load the entire truck by myself. The day a regular customer praised the quality of soybeans I'd helped grow. But the most significant moment came about 3 months into my full-time farming life. I was checking the newest plants when I spotted something that made my heart leap. Tiny green shoots breaking through the soil in perfect rows. These are from the seeds I planted, I whispered in awe, dropping to my knees for a closer look. They weren't just any sprouts, but they were my sprouts, the first tangible proof that I could actually do this. That evening, I couldn't contain my excitement as I told Robert about my discovery. His face softened as I gestured animatedly, describing every detail of the tiny plants.
Sarah, he said, pulling me close, I haven't seen you this happy in years.
His words made me pause and reflect. He was right. The empty feeling that had haunted me, the sadness of our childless home that I tried so hard to ignore, had begun to fade. In its place was something new: purpose, pride, and a deep connection to the land that sustained us. As my knowledge grew, so did my responsibilities. Martha began teaching me about crop planting and rotation, while George shared the intricacies of their composting system. I absorbed everything they taught me, filling notebooks with their wisdom and my own observations.
You've got good instincts,
George remarked one day as we examined a batch of particularly healthy plants.
You notice things others might miss.
I beamed at the praise, but before I could respond, a car engine broke through the peaceful morning silence. We turned to see a sleek, black SUV pulling into the driveway, kicking up dust in its wake. My stomach dropped as I recognized the vehicle. Michael and Lisa had returned. I watched as Michael and Lisa emerged from their SUV, both dressed as if they'd just stepped out of a business meeting rather than arriving at a working farm. Michael's Italian leather shoes, clearly new and unsuited for farm work, caught my attention. He's always prioritized appearance over practicality.
Mother! Father!
Michael called out, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that set my teeth on edge.
Surprise!
George and Martha emerged from the house, their expression a mix of shock and cautious joy at seeing their eldest son after so many years. Martha moved to embrace Michael, but Lisa stepped between them, her designer purse swinging.
We can't stay long,
Lisa announced, wrinkling her nose at the farm smells.
We just came to discuss some business matters.
The way she said business matters made my stomach clench. I glanced at George, noting how his shoulders had tensed. Perhaps we should all go inside, Martha suggested, ever the peacemaker. I just made fresh coffee. As we gathered around the kitchen table, the same table where countless family decisions had been made, I noticed how out of place Michael and Lisa looked among the simple, worn furnishings. Lisa kept shifting in her chair, as if afraid the wood might somehow contaminate her expensive clothing.
So,
Michael began, clearing his throat,
I've been doing some research about agricultural land values in this area. They've skyrocketed recently.
George's hand tightened around his coffee mug.
Have they now?
Indeed, Michael continued, pulling out a sleek tablet.
And I've had some very interesting conversations with developers who are looking to expand in this region. They're particularly interested in established farmland that could be converted for residential use.
The silence that followed was deafening. Martha's face had gone pale, and George's expression had hardened into granite. Convert the farm? Martha's voice trembled slightly. But this land has been in the family for generations. Lisa leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the morning light.
That's exactly why this is such a wonderful opportunity. Do you have any idea how much money you can make by selling? You and George could retire comfortably instead of working yourselves to death out here.
We're not dead yet,
George said quietly, but his voice carried a weight that made even Michael shift uncomfortably.
Father, be reasonable, Michael pressed. You've already mentioned ending the farming business. Why not do it on your terms with a substantial profit?
I couldn't stay silent any longer. They talked about ending it because they thought no one would continue their legacy, I interjected, but that's not true anymore. Michael turned to me as if noticing my presence for the first time.
Oh, and I suppose you think you're going to run this farm?
His laugh was sharp and dismissive.
A city woman who's been playing farmer for what? A few months? Sarah has shown more dedication to this land in those few months than you have in your entire life,
George stated firmly, causing Michael's face to flush red.
I'm the eldest son. Michael's composed facade cracked. This farm should be mine to decide what to do with.
The farm isn't just about ownership, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. It's about understanding the soil, the crops, the seasons. It's about respecting the work of generations and planning for the future. When's the last time you even touched a farming tool, Michael? Lisa's perfectly manicured hand slammed down on the table.
This is ridiculous. You're all living in the past. The land is worth millions to developers. Millions! And you want to waste it growing soybeans?
Those soybeans have fed families for generations, Martha said softly, including yours, Michael. Remember how proud you were when you first learned to help with the harvest? Something flickered across Michael's face. A shadow of memory, perhaps? But Lisa's hand on his arm seemed to harden his resolve. Things change, Mother. Nobody wants to be a farmer anymore. It's primitive, outdated. Look at how hard you and Father work. And for what? Barely breaking even most years? That's not true, I countered, pulling out my own notebook, the one where I'd been tracking everything I'd learned. The farm's organic certification and the Thompson family reputation command premium prices. We have waiting lists for our soybeans. With some modernization and expanded distribution channels, we could grow significantly while maintaining our quality. Michael scoffed, but I noticed George and Martha exchange interested glances. I'd been sharing my ideas with them gradually, but this was the first time I'd spoken about them so boldly. Show me, George said, and I spread my notebooks on the table, pointing out the calculations and plans I'd been developing. Martha leaned in, nodding as I explained my vision for the farm's future. As I explained my plans for the farm's future, Lisa's impatience finally boiled over.
This is absurd! Michael, tell them about the developer's deadline.
Michael at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. The developers need an answer within the week. They're prepared to make an extremely generous offer, but they have other properties they're considering if this falls through. A week? Martha gasped. To decide the fate of generations of work?
That's more than enough time to make a sensible business decision, Lisa snapped. Unlike some people, we have actual careers to get back to.
I watched George's face carefully as he studied my notebooks. His weathered hands traced the careful diagrams I've drawn of expanded growing areas and new irrigation systems. Finally, he looked up at Michael. Son, do you remember what your grandfather told us about this land? Michael shifted in his seat. Father, that was a long time ago. He said the land remembers. George continued, his voice growing stronger. It remembers every seed we plant, every crop we harvest, every step we take across its surface. And it remembers who truly cares for it. Standing up slowly, George walked to the old china cabinet in the corner. From behind it, he pulled out a worn leather folder I've never seen before. I've been keeping these safe, he said, returning to the table, waiting for the right time. Inside the folder were documents, property deeds, certificates, and what looked like hand-drawn maps of the farm from decades ago. George spread them out carefully. Your grandfather split this land into 3 parcels before he passed, he explained. The main farmhouse in Central Fields, the eastern expansion where Robert and Sarah's house is now, and the western field that's been lying fallow. Michael leaned forward eagerly, but George held up his hand. He left specific instructions about their distribution. The main farm would go to whichever of his descendants showed true commitment to continuing his legacy. Well, as the eldest son, Michael began, but George shook his head. Blood isn't enough, son. The land needs more than that. It needs love, dedication, and understanding. He turned to face me. Sarah has shown all of these things. The room fell silent. Even Lisa seemed shocked into speechlessness.
But she's not even a real Thompson, Lisa finally sputtered.
She became a Thompson the day she married Robert, Martha said firmly, and she's proven herself more devoted to this family's legacy than some who were born into it. This is outrageous! Michael stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward. I'll contest this. You can't give away my inheritance. It was never your inheritance to claim, George replied calmly. You chose your path long ago, son. You can't abandon something for years and then return expecting to profit from its sale. Robert chose that moment to arrive home early from work, his tie loosened and his face concerned. He must have received my urgent text about his brother's arrival. What's going on here? He asked, taking in the tense scene.
Your father has lost his mind, Lisa declared dramatically. He's trying to give your precious family farm to her!
She pointed at me as if I were something distasteful. Robert moved to stand behind my chair, his hand resting supportively on my shoulder. You mean to the person who's been here every day, working alongside our parents? The person who's learned every aspect of this farm while you two were off chasing real estate deals? Good. Michael's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This isn't over, he threatened, gathering his tablet and papers.
You'll be hearing from my lawyers. Perhaps we will, George replied evenly. But the land remembers Michael, and so do we.
After Michael and Lisa stormed out, the kitchen felt eerily quiet. Martha broke the silence by getting up to pour fresh coffee all around. I suppose we should talk about what happens next, she said, her hands only slightly shaking as she filled our cups. What do you mean? I asked, still trying to process everything that had just happened. George smiled, looking more relaxed than he had in weeks.
Well, if you're going to implement these expansion plans of yours, we have a lot of work to do.
We? I glanced around at their faces. George's quiet pride, Martha's warm encouragement, and Robert's loving support.
Yes, we.
Robert squeezed my shoulder, though I think I'd better stick to helping with the business side of things. My back still hasn't recovered from the last harvest. But what about Michael's lawyers? I worried.
Let them come, George said firmly. Your grandfather's wishes were clear, and more importantly, they were right. The land knows who truly loves it.
Martha reached across the table to take my hand. Besides, you've already proven something important today. And what's that? That sometimes the best way to handle bullies is to smile, agree, and then go do exactly what you know is right. I thought back to that morning in the field when Michael and Lisa had demanded more harvest from the barren ground. I'd smiled and agreed then, knowing in my heart I'd never return to work under their oversight. Instead, I'd found my true place, not just on the farm, but in this family. A family that valued dedication over birthright, love over profit, and the quiet wisdom of well-tended soil over the empty promises of quick wealth. That evening, as the sun set over our fields, Robert and I walked through the rows of soybeans I'd helped plant. The tiny sprouts had grown strong and tall, their leaves reaching toward the sky with determination that matched my own.
You know,
Robert said, stopping to examine a particularly healthy plant,
I've never seen you more in your element than you are right now.
I smiled, running my fingers gently over the fuzzy pods. I never expected to fall in love with farming, but now I can't imagine doing anything else.
Then it's a good thing this is just the beginning, he replied, pulling me close as we watched the final rays of sunlight paint our fields in gold.
In the distance, I could see the lights coming on in the farmhouse, where George and Martha were preparing dinner. Soon we joined them, gathering around that old kitchen table to plan tomorrow's work and share today's victories. There would be challenges ahead, weather to contend with, crops to tend, and yes, probably legal battles to face. But standing there in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the gentle rustling of healthy plants and the warmth of true family, I knew we would face it all together. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't confrontation or anger, but simply growing stronger, wiser, and more deeply rooted in what you know is right. After all, as George said, the land remembers, and so do we.